"Wow," I said as I stepped out of the cab and looked over its top toward the castle. "It's beautiful."
"Aye, 'tis," Elias said grudgingly. "We've our fair share of these sorts of places around here, I suppose."
"We aren't very far out of Edinburgh. I thought we'd have to go farther to see something like this," I said.
"No, not far at all."
"The Edinburgh castle is stunning, but this one's different. This one is much more primitive." I stepped around the cab and moved next to Elias.
"Aye," he said after a brief pause.
"What's wrong?"
"Just wondering where everyone is. This is usually a popular place for the tourists. I've driven one or two out here myself. Not raining, and not too cold right now either."
He looked around the small parking lot, empty except for us and his cab.
"More on the weekends, I suppose."
He lifted the cap from his head and then replaced it. His eyes scanned again, this time peering up at the castle and then into the surrounding trees. I didn't think it was the lack of other visitors that bothered him. He was uncomfortable about the reason we were there. He and his wife, Aggie, had made their concerns perfectly clear. The empty parking lot and the lack of other visitors bothered him more today than they would have under different circumstances. "Well, it's not as cold as it has been, but it's still pretty cold, and it's bound to rain sometime soon," I said too cheerily as I looked up at the dark, cloudy sky and the old castle. Elias grumbled. Elias and Aggie had been the perfect landlords as well as a kind and loving surrogate family, but sometimes they were a wee bit overprotective. They hadn't had children of their own. They'd never gone through the process of watching a child grow and become independent. As a result, they sometimes forgot that I was an adult. In fact, I was close to 30, but to them, I was their Delaney, their lass from Kansas in America, who'd only come into their lives a few months earlier. Most of the time, this was ideal. I welcomed their care and concern, and though I'd made the move across the world to prove to myself that I could be brave and bold, I'd had a few moments when the comfort from parents, even surrogate ones, had been appreciated. But I still had a job to do. I'd known my boss, Edwin McAllister, was mysterious and eccentric from the first moment I'd walked into his bookshop, The Cracked Spine, so this newly assigned task hadn't seemed too strange. But this morning, when I told Elias and Aggie the bare bones of the assignment, that I was going to meet someone on the top of the Castle Doune, just outside of Edinburgh, to pick up a comic book for Edwin, they'd first been intrigued, then curious, then wide-eyed with worry. They'd already decided that Elias would take me in his cab long before I could ask him for the ride. Edwin had asked me to meet someone at the castle who would bring with him an item that Edwin had purchased, or at least acquired in some sort of transaction. Edwin, seemingly on purpose, had avoided sharing more specific details about said transaction. However, I would know the person who was to hand over the item by their clothing. We would share some secret words to confirm that we'd been successful in finding each other, and the handoff would follow. It was all very cloak and dagger, but Edwin assured me I would be completely safe. I suspected he thought the whole notion of clandestine meetings was something I enjoyed. He was correct. I liked the secretive nature of his world. I liked that he'd been slowly letting me in on his many secrets. I thought that this assignment was doled out in the manner that was just his way. Elias and Aggie knew Edwin, but not as well as I did, so though I was working very hard to look unconcerned for Elias's sake, I did feel a tiny tug of a smile because Edwin would be pleased with the dark clouds adding to the atmosphere. My contact atop the roof would be wearing tights and a long tunic with a belt, similar to an outfit I remember wearing when I was in junior high school. He would be dressed as a famous Scottish historical figure who had lived and fought during the 13th century, a good 300 years before kilts became a component of Scottish men's wardrobes. According to Edwin, back then, men, particularly fighting men, wore whatever they had. They were poor, didn't even wear military garb, as they fought for their independence or to defend their property. They were rarely without their long swords, though, their wicked and heavy instruments of battle and bloodshed. Edwin made sure to tell me that my contact was not going to bring his sword. My contact was an actor, a reenactor, actually. He spent much of his time near a castle in Stirling, in a clearing next to a nearby William Wallace.